Hey guys, so welcome back to a work in progress channel. And you already know it's your girl Rolly. So today we're back with another makeup and Bible story video. This one is gonna be long, so I suggest you grab a snack and go ahead and get into this good old Bible tea. Okay, so I'm gonna give y'all a few disclaimers before we even start. Everything that is on my makeup is in the description box below. And all the Bible stories that I do on this Bible, in these episodes, I actually go read them out the Bible myself. So I go look them up and do my research myself. And I also leave that information down below. So if you want to go and read the story for yourself or anything, you have the option. So this story that we're gonna do, this is actually a two-parter, and it surrounds the life of King David, which he is very um, popular in teachings and preachings in Christianity, and and out the Holy Bible. And so his story starts though. It's a backstory before he comes into the story. So we're about to focus on the backstory, and the backstory focuses on Saul and a man named Samuel. So let's get into it. Now, at the time, Israel had no king. Israel was and is God's chosen people. And mind you, these are the people who was under Pharaoh's ownership at the time. Well, this was before what we're talking about. Their ancestors was under Pharaoh's ownership at the time. He had them as slaves. I don't know if you heard the story of Moses. That'll be another story that we could cover on this, but Moses then came, you feel me? Moses was the leader of them at the time, led them out of there, you feel me, away from Pharaoh. And then they went into the wilderness. God delivered them out of the wilderness. They've been through some stuff, but God just always delivered them. So now at this time, they didn't have no king. And the reason because of that is because God was their king. God was their leader. They didn't have a physical leader, like a human leader, like every other nation had. And so who was God's right hand man at the time? Like, he had Moses as his right hand man when Moses died. So who was God's right hand man over his people at the time was Samuel. And Samuel was an older man, and he also had sons of his own. And now, where Samuel was a man of great character, like, I would imagine, to be God's right hand man, you would have to be. And it says that in the Bible that, like, he was, very kind, very righteous, very fair, like, just good, overall good person. But his sons was not. And his sons will actually be the ones who would help him, like, basically fulfill duties over the people, but they were corrupt. They would take bribes from people. They would do sneaky, underhanded things. And they also say that when they made a conviction in court, that they will overturn it, if the person paid the right price, or based on their feelings. So they was not good people to help run a group of people, let alone God's chosen people. So one day the elders of the Israelites came to Samuel and they told him, like, hey, we need a king. And so Samuel's taken aback because he's like, why? Like, for what? Like, and they're like, look, we get down with you and everything. You cool, you're a cool guy. You in right standing. You are fair. You are just. But your sons are corrupt. And not only that, look at all the other nations. They all have a king ruling over them. And that's what we need. Give us a king to rule and judge over us. So he's not feeling it. Samuel is not feeling this. He's like, man. So he takes it to God before he consents to anything. And God is telling him, like, don't take it personal. because Samuel also was taking it personal, you know, and he's taking it personal as far as like they basically trying to say like he's not good enough for them, like, you know, because he's God right hand man and he's been the one holding it down. So he's taking it personal as far as like, oh, they think I'm not a good like right hand man, that I'm not doing things for them or something. And he's taking it that way, but the Lord is telling him like, don't take it that way, because they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And he's saying like, and this is what they always did and always do. You know, when they were, once they got freed out of Pharaoh's um enslavement, I don't know if that's the word, but once they got free out of that, they went into the desert. And in that wilderness, now this is their ancestors that I'm talking about. When they went into that wilderness, you know, Jesus looked out for them. I mean, excuse me, God looked out for them in that wilderness. But they started to make false idols and worship these different type of man-made objects they will make and stuff like that. And you know, like as if God just don't exist to them no more. And so here was another time where now they doing it in another way. It's like, well, God is our king, but he's not physically here, and everybody else have a physical um king, and we need somebody to rule over us. Da, 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 da. So he's like, don't take it personal. He like, this is what they always do, and just know that it's not you, it's me. So he's like, okay, so God tell him like, but nevertheless, you know, grant them they wish. He was like, they want a king, give them a king. But I want you to give them a warning about this king, because it's not going to be, he's not going to be what they think or bring what they think that he's going to bring to the table. And so Samuel is like, okay, he listens to God. God gives him the information and he goes and he relays it back to them. Now, the warning that he gives to them was saying that this king, this future king, it was going to force their sons to become soldiers, was going to force the sons to plow his field. He was going to force the sons to make weapons and other things for war. That he was going to force the daughters basically to like cook for him and make perfume for him, like be his personal slaves. And not only that, that he would go throughout his own land, taking things from his people, taking land, taking the greatest crop, the best crop, taking people's servants and using them as his own personal servants, and basically just treating his people like slaves and doing whatever he wants with them. It's almost like a big bully. Like, I'm your king now, so I can take whatever I want and you can't say no. So Samuel goes ahead and delivers this message to the people. Now, he also lets the people know that part of that warning was that they were going to cry and beg to God and ask him, like basically want him to remove that king. And God said that they wouldn't be answered at that time. So they will be wanting it to change right then and there, but they wouldn't be heard. And the people was like, they heard this and they was still like, bring us our king. We hear you. Okay, cool. But bring us our king, sis. That's all we want. So he does what he is told. So now this is where Mr. Saul comes in. And Saul was a Benjamite. He's from a tribe of Benjamites. And he was he was the most handsome and the most tall of all the people from his tribe. And not only that, Mr. Saul came from a long lineage of important men. So his great-great-father was important to that tribe. His grandfather was important to that tribe. And now his dad, Kish, was very important to that tribe. But Mr. Saul, even though he was the most handsome, the most tall of his tribe, you know, basically he stood out for good reason. He was also he had issues of his own. But um, one day his father loses some donkeys. And so he tells him and a few servants, like, hey, you guys need to go out and look for these donkeys. So they load up and they go. So they're traveling from neighboring town to town trying to find these donkeys. And what was supposed to be the last stop, Saul was telling his servant that was with him, like, hey, look, we've been looking for these donkeys and they haven't turned up anywhere. So I think my dad ain't gonna care about these donkeys no more. I think he gonna start missing me. Like, so we need to get back home. And so the servant is like, wait. Before we go, it's this man who everything that he says come to pass, which means come true. Maybe we could talk to him and he'll let us know where the donkeys is, and we can, you know what I mean, have the donkeys and return back some heroes or whatever. So Saul's like, all right, that's cool. Like, he live in this town, that's fine. We already here. Let's just try it, before we just make that journey back home. And so they go into town. They run across two young ladies who they actually begin to ask, like, where's the seer? And at this time, this is what they call prophets before they call prophets. So instead of them being called a prophet, they were called a seer. And that's what Samuel was. He was a seer. And so he asked the two young ladies, like, hey, where's the seer at? And they were like, oh, you guys are perfect on time because, he only comes into town when it's to be an offering made, a burnt offering. And now anybody just cannot do these burnt offerings. They were specially reserved for the seer, the prophet, the one who was the go-between for the people and for God. So Samuel was in town. So they're like, okay, where is he? And they pointed him in the direction of him. Mind you, this is at a time, y'all, they don't have no cell phones. So it wasn't like, no, you know him? Like, and show him a picture or anything. They just like, hey, he's over there. So they had to go look through a crowd of people to see who was the seer. And luckily, they didn't have to look far because guess who was right there? Mr. Samuel. And what Saul and others didn't know was that the day before, God had went to Samuel and told him, the king will come to you around this hour tomorrow, and he will be from the tribe of the Benjamites. So Samuel was already on the lookout for Saul. So he actually spotted him first, but Saul walked up to Samuel and asked him, like, hey, you know where the seer is? And he was like, yeah, I'm him. And so he was like, woo, I could just imagine, like, yes, bumped into him on the first try. I ain't got to ask all these people. So Samuel lets him know, like, hey, I know you have a lot of questions for me, but what I want you to do is I want you to come with me to the high place and eat with me. And tomorrow I'll send you back on your way home. And I don't know how Saul felt, but that would have been significant to me because not only is he asking me to eat at the high place, which this is not, the high place was a place of worship. Excuse me. The high place was a place of worship. And so not anybody could just go over there and eat. Like, this was reserved for people like Samuel, And not only that, he let him know right away, like, look, I'm only going to keep you for today, and tomorrow I'll send you back home. Now, Saul had told his servant before they even got anywhere in the vicinity of Samuel, like, look, my dad is probably no longer worried about these donkeys. He's most likely worried about me now, and we need to get back home. And all of a sudden, Samuel is saying, hey, I'm only going to keep you for today, and I'll send you back on your way home tomorrow. So that's very significant. Like, he knew that he was in a crunch for time. But he also let him know, I know you have a lot of questions for me, and I'm going to let you sup with me, eat with me, and I will answer all your questions. Saul goes to eat with Samuel, him and his servant, and he lets him know, like, your donkeys are okay. They were found. They're all right. Don't worry about the donkeys. So he's like, okay. So they sup, they eat together, talk. He answers, I guess, the questions that he has, other questions. And the next day comes, and Samuel walks or escorts Saul and his servant to the edge of town because, mind you, he was supposed to be going back home that day. So as they get to the edge of town, Samuel tells Saul, hey, send your servant before us, send him ahead of us, so that way I can talk to you in private because there's some things I need to tell you in private. And so Saul obliges and send his servant ahead of him so that him and Samuel can have a private conversation. And in that private conversation, Samuel lets him know, like, I already know who you are. I already knew who you was. God already told me everything about you. And what I want you to know is you're going to be the next. Excuse me. Let me stop saying the word next. Because once again, Israelites did not have a king before him. So, or at least a God-chosen king. Pharaoh was not a God-chosen king. So, once again, he was like, you're the king. You're going to be king of the Israelite people, of God's chosen people. And he's like, I'm pretty sure Saul was like, what? Like, I just came here and get some answers about some donkeys. I ain't not come here expecting to leave a king. And so he blesses him and anoints him as king. So what he did was he put oil on his head and then he kissed him. I don't know where he kissed him, was on lips or the cheeks. I don't know. I will have to look up that information to see what was the customs when anointing somebody as king. But nevertheless, the Bible says that he put oil on his head and kissed him. And he went, before he goes on his way, Samuel actually lets him know, like, look, to let you know how valid this is and how real this is, here is a list of things that's going to take place after you leave here for me. And so he begins to, sorry, y'all. He begins to list off certain events that was going to take place once Saul left his presence. And it's long. He bumps into two group of people. One group lets him know that the donkeys were found and that they were okay. And the other group of people he runs into is under this oak tree. And everything that Samuel said happened. And that actually was in the scriptures. That's 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 3 through 8. So one of the things that was supposed to take place, or that did take place once Samuel got back to his hometown, was that he was going to run into some prophets of his tribe, and that he was going to start praising God with them and worshiping. And that's exactly what happened. And while he was doing that, somebody that recognized him was like, is that Saul over there worshiping with the prophets? Like, what is he, a prophet now? And it became like this famous saying around his tribe. Like Saul is what is Saul, a prophet? And I guess that was supposed to be like a joke or referencing something, but nevertheless, it became a famous saying. So once he did actually arrive home, his uncle confronts him, and it reminds me of like a scene from Next Friday when they're like, Craig, where the hell you been? And I can just imagine his uncle being that way, like, Saul, where the hell you been? So Saul just letting him know, like, where he been. But his uncle knew that he ran into Samuel, and he asked him, he said, well, what did Samuel say, And he's like, oh, he just told me where the donkeys was and that the donkeys were okay. And so he was like, okay. He didn't mention nothing about him being appointed king or anything. So now let's flash forward to now. King is actually going to be, I said king. Saul is actually about to be appointed and anointed king in front of everyone. And the ceremony is going on. Everybody is there. Now, back in those days, it wasn't uncommon for someone to not only relocate, but for their whole family to relocate. And in one of the scriptures, Samuel actually did tell him, like, you and your family, like, needs to come over here. And so Saul's whole family relocates. That's one thing I do like about the Bible. Very family oriented, like, and this is just a side note. I do believe in generational curses and blessings. And it's all up and through the Bible, like, of generational curses and blessings. And this story is just one. So it's like, it's kind of scary when you think about it like that, because it's like your actions, what you do or what you won't do, hinges on the well-being and the welfare of your generations to come. That's a scary thought to think about. Like, that's a lot of pressure. But anywho, back to the story. Him and his family relocates. Now they're at the ceremony to anoint him as king, right? Well, the way the Bible says it, people start looking around because they seen Billy, Johnny, and they like, okay, they not Saul. They're not about to be king. Where's the king? Where's the future king? This man was hiding in the back behind some supplies. And Samuel's like, I know where he is. Let me get him. So he went to go get him. And it could tell you something about Saul's character. Like, you're about to be anointed and appointed as king over God's chosen people. And instead of you making a good impression and stepping up to this role with confidence, you went and you hid at your own ceremony. So that right there could rub people the wrong way about, him and him as a person. Mind you, this man was the most handsome and the tallest of his tribe, of his people. Not only that, God handpicked him to be the king over the chosen people. So Samuel goes and get him. They finish the ceremony, like anointing him, appointing him, letting everybody know this is your new king and stuff like that. And, everyone after that is to go home and disperse. Well, it was a few people who stayed behind. And these people were people who was not fan of Saul. Like, they really didn't have no faith in him. And they were just sitting around gossiping, basically. And they were saying, like, oh, I don't care about none of that. Like, I don't trust him. I ain't got no faith in him. And it was customary that when somebody got appointed king or anything in a high position, that people brought gifts to them. These people refused to give him gifts. They didn't give him no gifts. They didn't give him no time. They didn't give him nothing. They were like, he don't deserve it, boo. He just don't deserve it. And he heard this, but whatever. So now, as king now, he runs into his first problem. So, in a kingdom, I don't know how far away from his, but in a distant kingdom, we'll just say for now, there was a problem arising. And the problem was that it was a king named Nahash, who was the king of the Ammonites. And what he started to do was take out the right eyeball of all the Israelite people who lived in his territory. It doesn't give a reason why this man started to do that. They just say he just started to do that. Now, I don't know what was wrong with that man and why he just woke up one day and thought that plucking out some eyeballs was just it, but he thought so, and nevertheless, he started to take people's eyeballs out. And what happened was these men started to flee from his kingdom and seek refuge in another kingdom. And so a lot of them, they said 7,000 Israelites fled from his kingdom. And a lot of them ran to a neighboring town or kingdom of Jabesh Gilead. And so with that, it's like a little birdie tipped off Mr. Nahash, like, hey, you want to know where, the people that you was over there plucking their eyeballs out, where they went? I heard they ran to Jabesh Gilead. And so this sick man decided, well, I'm going to go there. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to surround that territory until I get what I want. And see, the fact that he was able to surround that territory lets us know, in the context clue, that this kingdom of Jabesh Gilead had to be far smaller than the Ammonites' kingdom, because he was able to surround them. And not only that, he was telling them, look, if you let me take out the right eyeball of everyone, now, everyone, you have to think, it's babies, it's women, and it's men. It's not just men that live in these towns, these kingdoms, but he was asking for everyone's right eyeball as like a signature, I guess, to be like, don't mess with me. But sir, well, nobody messed with you to begin with. You just woke up and thought, I'm going to start poking out Israelites' eyeballs. And they ran. So he nevertheless wanted everybody's right eyeball. Now, good old Jabesh Gilead leader was like, no. But that no wasn't, it was firm, but they knew what they were up against. And how we know that was because they actually made a deal with King Nahash. And what they told King Nahash was, look, give us a week. Give us 7 days. 7 days to send out our messengers to neighboring kingdoms and see if somebody will help us fight you. And if they don't, we'll surrender to you and you can do whatever you want with us. And, it's like Debo and Red, if you ever seen Friday. Two whole men sitting next to Red. They let his whole chain get took. They didn't say nothing. And he ran back to the car like... That, I'm pretty sure, was what King Nahash saw while he was sitting up there punking these people. And so the messengers nevertheless went out and was telling neighboring kingdoms, like, look, we need your help because, this is what's happening to us and we need help. Like, we can't fight them on our own. So one of these messengers ended up in Saul's territory and began to tell Saul what was going on with his people. And Saul, they say the Spirit of God overcame Saul. So where his natural self might have been like, this is not my battle to fight, because mind you, in the beginning he was hiding. To me, if I had to look at it, I don't think he really wanted to be king. And he definitely didn't want no beef with no other kings. But the Spirit of God came over him and gave him that confidence and that strength. And what did Saul say? Let's get it. So he lets him know, like, we'll help you. And the messenger goes back. And what he does is, or she, I'm not sure if it's he or she, I would think it was a he. is let Jabez Gilead leaders know, like, we got help. But they were smart when they decided, like, they were going to go back to King Nahash and make it seem as though they didn't have help. So what they told King Nahash and his army was, look, tomorrow at this time, like, we'll surrender to you and you guys could do whatever you want. So what that did to them was make them put their guard down. They're like, okay, we don't even have to fight because they don't have nobody to fight with them. So all we have to do is just get rested for this torturing tomorrow. That's it. And that's exactly what they did. They chilled out and wasn't suspecting a thing. And what King Saul was over there doing, they said this man gathered 300,000 Israelite men and 30,000 men from Judah. That's 330,000 men. That's a lot. That's a lot. And so he gathered them up and he split them up into groups of 3. And what they did was ambush the Ammonites when they was changing shifts. So while one Ammonite was clocking out, another one was clocking in. You know how it be, taking off your uniform or whatever, like, yeah, just talking and, yeah, man, all right, da-da-da-da. Guess what? Boom, boom, boom. They getting lit up by these people. And they said that no 2 soldiers ran in the same direction. That's how bad they was getting tore up, okay? They didn't even think to stick together. They was just running, flailing. I think that's the word. Their arms like just gone, like. And there, King Saul had a victory under his belt, and the people was happy. They was ecstatic, and so ecstatic to the point that they said, now, let's gather those people who sat up there and didn't believe in him and refused to give him gifts when he was appointed king in front of us, and let's kill them. And that's when Saul was like, screw all the music cut. He looked, he said, no, this ain't it, baby. No, we ain't doing that now. And he's like, you know what? This is all God. It wasn't even me. It was God. So let's just celebrate, have a good time. And this was like the second ceremony of him getting appointed as king. Like, it was like a redo because they redid everything. Like, they reappointed him king, anointed him. They praised the fact that they had a victory under their belt. And now everybody was in unison and joining him and blessing him as king. So now it was no haters. And mind you, I know I wouldn't want to be killed behind that. So I'm pretty sure they got their act together real quick. Like, look, this is it. I'm so glad he's king. Like, forgive me for I did not know what I was doing back then. Okay? So now it's the next part of this story. Okay. So while the festivities of the victory of Saul was continuing, this is where Samuel comes in and he's like, this is my chance to let them know what's really up. And so Samuel steps in and he starts to basically read these people to filth because they got what they wanted, right? A king. But they still was acting the same way they was before they got what they wanted. Meaning they were still unappreciative of God and not trying to give God the praise. They was quick to praise an idol or a man, but did not want to praise their God who kept delivering them out of situation. And so while Samuel is reading them on their bad character, he decides to let them know, look, I'm going to prove this to you I'm going to pray and ask God to let it thunder and rain if he is disappointed in you guys. So if it thunders and rains, that means he disapproved of your actions of asking for a king and the things you guys have been behaving like. And he said that's what he was going to do. And that's exactly what he did. And what happened? That same day, later on, it rained and it stormed. And that was God confirming what Samuel had said. So this shook these people, okay? They thought they were going to die. And they ran to Samuel like, Samuel, please, like basically atone for our sins. Please beg God on behalf of us, like that, you know, we're sorry. We sorry for everything that we did and da 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 da. And so Samuel is like, look, your God loves you. You are his own people after all. Like, y'all literally God's people. Like, you can't get no better than that. You can't. But, you know, change your ways. Stop acting like your ancestors. Stop being ungrateful. Stop idolizing things and people and start worshiping and honoring the one who made you and the one who keeps delivering you out of the hand of enemies. And he starts to tell them how they can do that, right? So they're like this time having a more humble attitude, I can imagine. Because before, when he used to try to warn them about things by mouth, you know, they really didn't take it so serious. Part of that warning that Samuel also lets them know is that, look, you basically, your king, because y'all wanted this king, you guys are responsible for his behavior, and vice versa. He's responsible for you guys. So if you guys do not turn away from your ways and be obedient and start listening to me and start, you know, praising God the way he deserves and stuff, y'all will be swept out like a broom. Now, imagine, I'm pretty sure we all swept something, done swept some dirt, and how easily dirt picks up and be swept out. Now, imagine God just swiping his hand over a nation of people and killing them all in one swipe. Gone, dead. That's how easy he can wipe out a group of people. And mind you, when Saul came into play, God was already having a disobedient problem with these people. They kept being disobedient. It's like a child that don't listen. And you constantly have to repeat yourself and constantly have to help them out of situations that they put themselves in. And constantly. This is the same sentiment that God was going through with his own people. He was constantly bailing them out of situations, constantly looking out for them. And they were constantly making him look like he's not good enough. I can't speak for how God felt, but I know he had to be a little angry. So now they were responsible for each other's actions. And I do feel a little bit bad for Saul in a sense because he didn't really ask for this responsibility. But one thing that I could say about him, because things take a turn, during this time, he was being obedient and he was giving God the credit he deserved. And by everybody knows, when the head is good, the body follows, and vice versa. When the head is bad, the body follows. And he was the head of God's people. And if they see him constantly reverencing God, honoring him, and being obedient to him, guess what? They're going to feel inclined to do the same thing. But it didn't stay that way. And that's where we're going to come back with the other part of the story. Saul makes his first mistake, y'all. And this mistake was detrimental. Now, I did go into detail how God was already having a lot of issues as far as obedience with his people, the Israelites. So, in this situation, by this time, we know that Saul had ruled over Israel for 42 years at this point. And it also lets us know that he was 30 years old when he became king. So, if you do the math, that means that at this time, Saul was 72 years old. 72 when he makes his first and detrimental mistake against God. And the story goes like this. So, by this time, like I said, Saul is 72. He has a son named Jonathan. Now, he used to stay in Gibeah before he decided to move to the hill country of his territory. And I would imagine that's like you moving from like a suburb, a cool little suburb, maybe like Torrance or something, and moving to like Beverly Hills. You feel me? You went from good to better. Like, and his son still stayed in Gibeah. And so he decides that he will take 2,000 men along with him. So he has 2,000 men that be with him and 1,000 men that stays with Jonathan. So that's 3,000 men altogether. Now his son Jonathan, he goes on to ambush the Philistines' camp. He goes on their territory, ambushes them, and defeats them. Now, the Philistines to the Israelites was like that bully that picked on you every now and then. Like, you can't even really call them like a bully, but they picked on you every now and then, you know? It wasn't like full on torture or anything like that, but it's just like you really want to stay out of their way. And they also had this kind of dynamic where, like, you know, the Philistines knew that they had the Israelites like under their thumb, so to speak, because their army was bigger, their kingdom was bigger, and everything else. So they kind of knew they had them under their thumb. So it was kind of like, I know they ain't gonna do nothing against me. You feel me? And I go over there and pick on them every once in a while. But we cool. Well, after Jonathan did that, that changed. Because when they did do that ambush and defeat them, Saul decides to blow trumpets throughout his kingdom, throughout his territory, announcing it and very proud about it. He's proud of his son Jonathan, like, yeah, my son the man, he defeated the Philistines. Like, and you know, that's a big victory for them because once again, they were significantly smaller, a smaller kingdom compared to these Philistines. And side note, if you remember the story about David and Goliath, Goliath was a Philistine. A huge, giant Philistine. But anyways, that's gonna come later on. But yeah, his son defeated the Philistines. So he's announcing this, very proud of this. And them going onto Philistine territory had already rubbed the Philistines the wrong way. So they was already mad about that. Not only was they mad about them going onto their territory, they were mad about them ambushing them. But what made it worse was that Saul was rubbing it in and they had killed one of the Philistine leaders in that ambush. So this really just rubbed them all the way wrong and enraged them. So at this point, he knew something was coming because he gathered, and I'm speaking about Saul, he gathered his men at Gilgal. And so, you know, they like, okay, they at Gilgal, whatever, we about to go to war because what Jonathan did, they did. So they gather there And guess what happens? The Philistines showed up. But not only did they show up, they showed out. Because the Bible states that they were numbered like sand on the shores. Now, I hope all of us been to a beach before, but if we haven't, I'm pretty sure you've seen sand. It is very, very hard with the natural eye to count even just a few grains of sand because of how small and how like numerous they are. It's like so hard to do that. Now, that lets us know in reference how many men surrounded them. That's a whole lot of men to where they look like grains of sand. But the Bible also gives us a number, and they say that it was 6,000 horse soldiers and 3,000 chariot soldiers. So that lets us know that the Philistines showed up with 9,000 men. They was not playing with them. And mind you, one of their leaders got killed. So this had to be, they had to be made an example of. You killed our leader. And not only that, you running around here boasting about it and boasting about what you did. Remember, these are people who they thought they had under their thumb. And they will bully them, but not bully them so far. But this took a turn for the worse. And so Saul is like, oh my gosh. He started boo-booing bricks. Okay, he's like, I was not expecting him to show up with all these people. You feel me? They showed up on our turf with all these dudes. Like, what am I supposed to do? And this is the messed up part about this story. He already is outnumbered, right? Tell me why his men, Saul's men, they start abandoning ship, y'all. They said they start hiding in rocks and caves. They said that they start running to seek shelter in neighboring towns. Like, they just start abandoning a girl, okay? Like, not the girl, but they just start abandoning him, okay? Like, they just left him. They wasn't even thinking, like, they was like, yeah, can't do this, I'm out running. And so, as time went on, his army got smaller and smaller. So people just kept running at a rapid rate. Like, they were like, sorry, Saul, I'm out of here. They probably even say that. They was just gone. Okay? If they even went to sleep, they was creeping out and was just like seeking shelter and refuge in somebody else's town. And this really put him in a messed up place. Now, somebody went, or I don't know how it came to be in his state. Pretty sure God let Samuel know, because remember, Samuel is God's right hand man. Samuel found out about this, and he tells Saul, look, 7 days, I'll be there in 7 days, a week, to bail you out. I will do a burnt offering, and don't worry, you'll have victory over this battle. Now, he's been in reign for, what did it say, 72 years. This man, he has defeated battles, all this. He defeated armies. He's done some great things with God by his side. God had made him a good king. And he also was very obedient to God. So, this should have been like a no-brainer in a sense, because it's like he's been helping you have battles, defeat battles, you know what I mean? And this was probably the one that took the cake, because he was just like, okay, this looks a lot more impossible than other ones, but nevertheless, like, trust God, you feel me? Well, 7 days was too long for Saul. And so what he did was like, look, I ain't even, you know what? Now that I think about it, like, I ain't even I didn't even pray to God by myself. I didn't even, you know what I mean, like consult God myself. So maybe I could just sit up here and do the burnt offering myself and everything will be okay. And that way Samuel doesn't have to come back here, right? Everything will be all right. So what he do, he go and do the burnt offering. Now, guys, if you remember in the story from back when they first met, what was Samuel on his way to do? Yes, a burnt offering. Where? At the high place. And who was made for the high place? Prophets and people high in authority. So why would Saul think that that would change, even though he was king over God's people? But Samuel was the anointed one to do these burnt offerings. And guess what happened as soon as that burnt offering was over? Samuel walks up. It was the 7th day. And all he had to do was wait a few more minutes and he would have got what he needed and defeated that battle. And so when Samuel sees that he's done with this burnt offering, he just got finished, Samuel is out of his mind. He's like, what have you done? You know? And Saul is like, look, man, like I just did. Look, he was basically start rambling, y'all. Like, look, I just sat up here, I just did the burnt offering just so you know what. Like I was thinking, like, ain't no point for you to come all the way over here in a week, you know, just do a burnt offering. I could do burnt offering myself and I would just pray to God and let God know, you know, that at the end of the day he could have kept you over there and you've been okay. And I would just did the burnt offering, won the war, and everybody would been cool. Samuel was not having it. He was like, do you know what you just done? You did a very foolish thing. And he lets him know, you just forfeited, meaning you just lost your whole family's reign over Israel forever. Now, that meant that King Saul's children's, like keep going on forever, would have been reigning over Israel's people, God's very own chosen people forever. And because he decided to be disobedient and go handle things the way he wanted to handle it and do it, guess what? That generational blessing got cut right then and there. And Samuel is letting him know. And not only that, Samuel also let him know, look, God is already searching for somebody to replace you. That fast. And then he lets him know he found him. I was like, And after that, they say Samuel returned back home. Like he left Gilgal. He left him with them words and left. And that's where we're going to end this story. We're going to come back for part 2. Now, afterthoughts. Y'all, this is like one of my favorite stories out of the Bible for multiple reasons. Because it has a lot of stuff that you could take and apply to your life. And principles that you could apply to your life as far as being a good person and believing in God. And Saul, we all done been there. Like where you gotta wait on God, you know, and it seems like the situation is impossible. It's all set waiting on him. You take things into your own hands. And this story is significant because he had been obedient to God for 72 years out of his reign, out of his kingdom, just obeying God, and found that he was a great king. And then he goes and decides, like, look, God is taking so long, maybe I got this. And it's significant because the main problem that God was having with the people was disobedience. And what did he do? He went and became disobedient, did a disobedient act. And I feel like, from a natural standpoint, we probably like, well, dang, God didn't have to go that hard on him. But look how many blessings he blessed him with. Look how many times he built the people out of situations. Like, God is a great, gracious God, and he kept doing things and doing things and doing things. And with afterthought, I feel like this is something that's just, we have to be careful of taking advantage of God, because God is not to be mocked. Okay, at the end of the day, like, he does things for us and he has mercy and grace for us, but it can run out, and you can't sit up here and think that you could keep taking advantage of him and taking advantage of him and thinking that God don't know your heart, because he knows your thoughts before you even think it. He knows your ways before you even do it. So if you think you playing him by being conniving and sneaky and all this other stuff, you're not. He already knows your heart. He already knows your deceitfulness. And he knows when you're really sorry. And he knows when you're just running game. So, with these Israelite people, they found themselves in very messed up situations and call on God when they need him. And then when they felt like they didn't need him no longer, then it was like, okay, you know what, like, back to our regular scheduled program. Well, Saul was against that until he did that day. And that cost him not only his reign over Israel, but his children's and generations to come. And another thing I want to point out in this story is that God don't need us to fulfill what he needs to fulfill. He uses us, but do he really need us? Because right after he did that disobedient act towards God, his spirit already went out and started searching for the next person. And he found him. And all I'm going to say is your replacement can be closer than you think. So be careful. Don't ever think that somebody can't do what you can do. Because once you start getting that arrogant attitude, the person who you least expect, or you think least qualified, or you think least of, will come in and do your duty. So I'm going to leave this here with you guys. Like I said, everything that I used on my face, I will definitely put in the description box below. I hope you guys enjoy this content, because I really do enjoy making it and researching this and all that, So I got done with the story before my makeup. But I really do enjoy researching it and doing this type of videos. It is educational, but at the same time, like I said, I just pray you really apply this to your life. Know that the Bible is full of stories. Ain't nothing under the sun that has not happened already in this world, ain't nothing new. So I hope you guys have a good one. Remember to tell a friend to subscribe, and tell your man to tell his man to tell his man to subscribe. Okay, thank you for all the support and love, and catch you in the next episode.